Ask Reddit. Police officers of Reddit, what are some laws that you feel uncomfortable enforcing because you disagree with them? It's not a specified law as such, but in the UK people can use reasonable force to protect themselves, others and property act. Obviously everyone has their own interpretation of what reasonable force is, but I remember going to one job where a bloke was sat on his couch with a beer watching TV when a drunk bloke has just walked straight into his living room via the front door. A confrontation ensued and the drunk trespasser had become aggressive and a fight ensued. Long story short, the trespasser was given a proper shoe-in. So much so he's ended up in the street where he has then called the police. We attended and his injuries were substantial enough that the house occupant was arrested for grievous bodily harm, GBH. And it most definitely rubbed me up the wrong way in being involved in that job because I totally sympathized with the guy and felt any of us would have probably done the same thing if we were in his position. So here is one that bugs me. John leaves the bar feeling okay, gets in the car and starts to drive home. During the drive he realizes that he's drunker than he thought, or his back is still ramping up from his last drink. Yes, you can be drunker a half hour after leaving a bar. He makes a decision to not drive the rest of the way home and pulls off the road at a rest stop or a parking lot. Puts the car in park. Turns off the headlights but leaves it running to listen to the radio, run the heat or AC, whatever. Moves the seat back and starts sleeping it off a little. At that point he is not driving while intoxicated. He did drive while intoxicated but realized he was impaired and stopped. Maybe a pie if he's obnoxious or was obviously severely impaired. I argued with my instructor about this. The goal is to not have drunks on the road. The drunk got off the road on his own. If we pop those people for DWI, the lesson learned and retold to all of their drunk friends is, if you start to drive drunk, don't stop. Keep driving, all the way home. Of course it's ideal if they Uber or have a DD. Take a cab or public transport, but I'd rather have people who went a little overboard comfortable with the idea of getting off the damned road as soon as they realize it than thinking they have to make it all the way home or get a DWI. Then they hit some family car with a baby in the car seat. Driving while impaired with resulting grievous injury or death. There's a statute on the books where I works that prohibits any amount of Schedule 1 drugs in your bloodstream while operating a vehicle. Marijuana is still illegal here and is still classed as a Schedule 1 drug by state law. If you are unaware, the byproducts of marijuana use can be detected in your blood weeks after your high has passed. That means that you could legally smoke marijuana in any one of several nearby states where it is completely legal to do so. Wait a few weeks. Come to my shithole state. Get crashed into while stopped at a red light with the other driver completely at fault. Pass the field sobriety test with flying colors. Then get banged for our version of driving while impaired with resulting grievous injury or death. I didn't actually know the marijuana provision of the per se DWI statute when I joined the county-wide crash team as an evaluator. Someone told me a story about a guy they'd done who been completely faultless in an accident wherein 2 people had died and had admitted to smoking marijuana a few weeks earlier. That formed the basis for a search warrant and he was convicted of the felony based on the blood work. I started advising unimpaired, faultless drivers of the marijuana provision. The attorneys told me to stop. So I quit the team. Not a cop, but my buddy is. He absolutely hates pulling traffic stops and giving tickets unless the person is doing something super reckless. He thinks for the most part they are useless and add to the community's dislike of police. Not to mention they are statistically pretty dangerous for him. I'm not a cop anymore, but I rarely arrested for personal use marijuana. It's a harmless plant. Selling is a different story, because most of those dealers are supporting a cartel or a higher crime and I don't agree with that. There was one case, where a bunch of guys in my agency would have arrested in a heartbeat, and honestly, by law I was required to investigate, but didn't. A car drove through the back of someone's house because the driver confused the brake and gas pedal. The house that was driven through had a lone marijuana plant in another room, which is a felony in my state, and growers get shit on in my state. I stepped in front of it so the firefighters and others wouldn't notice and raise hell about it. This homeowner was a good ole boy, and a church-going father who worked a nice job and contributed greatly to society. I'm not trying to ruin his family's life over a plant. When I walked out of the house and came back in, the plant was missing. He was probably shitting bricks the whole time I stood there. Now that I'm not a cop, I thought about leaving a letter in his mailbox telling him I knew about the plant, but I don't want to make him paranoid, lol. Arresting homeless people. We usually just bring them in but forget to file paperwork on them, so they get a warm bed, a breakfast, and no record. Traffic tickets. I'd pull people over, give a verbal warning about whatever dumb or unsafe thing they just did, check for warrants and let them go. I got funny looks for the blank spot in my work card where the tickets were supposed to go, but since it's illegal to officially or unofficially have a quota system, it could never be used against me in my job evaluation. When I was a parking officer, there was an internal policy about not ticketing cars parked in this very wealthy neighborhood even if it was clearly an unsafe violation. They would park their trailers or small boats very close to intersections, and that made it dangerous to navigate around there. Because there were too many big wigs, we could have risked our jobs if we ticketed someone there, so they decided to not have the parking officers enforce it. Back in my Leo career days, I was always very uncomfortable with using dogs to search for drugs. Yeah, they really can sniff out drugs, but the false positive accuracy is so far out of whack with what should be a legal standard for reasonable suspicion that it's little better than guessing. If a dog hits on 100 cars, and 50% of them have no drugs in them, you just violated the civil rights of 50 people based on what a dog said. Dogs aren't people. You can't interview or cross-examine them in court. Ex-police officer here in the US. The two that stand out the most is how much officer discretion is used in each scenario for someone to go to jail. Could be the same person with the same amount of illegal substance. I could destroy the evidence and send them away, or I could take them to jail. Up to the officer. The second would be the ability to ticket each window as a legal tint instead of one just for the car. I am no longer a cop, but when I was, I refused to wait hidden for someone to drive by and give them a ticket. I didn't believe in that. Now please upvote me, a wholesome retired cop. Homelessness. We would get so many calls of transients in certain areas. Most are just laying in the sun on the grass, not bothering anyone. But all it takes is a phone call from a board commissioner or someone in power and we'd get a call to tell them to move. We all hated it. Seatbelt tickets. I'm sure this is not a popular one, but if you don't like wearing your seatbelt while driving, I could care less. If you want a new face, that's on you. Marijuana. Smoke it all you want. Just don't drive. Fishing license. Nuff said. I was a seasonal park ranger over the 2019 summer. I went into the job thinking that I'd be doing more rangery things. You know, wildlife, information, etc. Instead, I quickly learned that park rangers are on the same level as state troopers, and that our seasonals were the grunts enforcing the other laws that the full-time rangers were too busy to handle. The park I worked at was built in the 80s, so the campgrounds and whatnot were exceptionally small by modern-day standards. Some things I hated enforcing and would turn a blind eye as much as possible. Keeping your vehicle parked on the asphalt. This one was rough because of how big campers are now, and how small our sites were. Sometimes you just had to squeeze onto the grass a little bit so everything fit. I usually gave these people a heads up that the other rangers might contact them for it. Keep your dog on a leash at all times. God, I hated this rule. I'm a dog person, and if I saw people with their dog off leash running around in a field by themselves, I would leave it. The entire season there was only one instance when an off-leash dog got aggressive, and that's because the owner was drinking and got into a physical altercation with another park goer and the dog was trying to protect his master. No hammocks in the trees. What? Seriously? You can't hang a hammock here? The reasoning was that hammocks damaged the trees. Okay, maybe the ones with the hooks do, but I literally never saw those the entire season. Not an officer but criminal defense attorney. Driving while license revoked tickets are an absolute racket in North Carolina, and savvy cops have realized they don't care to enforce it. Basically what happens is a lower income person gets a traffic ticket for speeding or whatever. The judge will give them up to 30 days to pay the ticket after the court date. However, because the fines are generally $213 to $263, a lot of lower income people cannot afford to pay the ticket. So, once the time to pay expires, the DMV revokes their license. Then, someone will get pulled over for having a revoked license. At this point, they still have the reason for the revocation outstanding. They have a new, more serious ticket, and they have to pay reinstatement fees with the DMV to get their license back, assuming they are able to clear up the reason for the revocation. Oh yeah, if you plead guilty to driving while license revoked, your license will be suspended automatically for 1 year for your first offense, or even longer if it's not your first offense. Generally, people will not come to me, defense attorney, until they are already charged with driving while license revoked, because that is when they realize how screwed they are. The good news is, I have talked to some officers about these driving while license revoked tickets who don't care about the offense. They just want to see the client get their license back. So, they will either tell the DA they don't want it prosecuted, or just get it set on a court date when the officer won't be there so I can get it dismissed. It is all about the money. Total fucking racket.